At my son's funeral, his wife's lover leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, old man. I will spend his millions better than he did." The audacity took my breath away, but before I could clench my fist to strike him, a sound froze the blood in my veins. I heard my son's quiet, distinctive chuckle coming from inside the sealed coffin. The whole room went dead silent. What happened next exposed a conspiracy so dark it would force me, a 75-year-old retired Army engineer, to declare war on the most powerful people in Atlanta. My name is Otis King. I have spent my life building bridges and clearing minefields, but nothing prepared me for the wreckage of my own family. If you have ever felt in your gut that something was wrong, even when everyone told you to accept it, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from, and I will try to reply to as many of you as I can. Now let me tell you how the dead began to speak. The air inside St. Mark's Cathedral was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. Hundreds of people packed the pews, a sea of black designer suits and false sorrow. They were there to mourn Marcus King, the tech genius, the billionaire, the founder of King Sentinel. But I was just there to bury my boy. I sat in the front row, my hands resting on the cane that had been my constant companion since my hip surgery last year. My knuckles were white. To my right sat Jessica, my daughter-in-law. She was a vision of tragic beauty, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, looking fragile enough to break. Hovering protectively over her was Brad Sterling, my son's chief financial officer and best friend. Or so the world thought. I knew better. I had seen the way his hand lingered on her lower back a little too long. I had seen the texts pop up on her phone when she thought I was napping in the guest house. But today, Brad wasn't trying to hide. He sat down next to me, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive cologne and scotch. The priest was droning on about Marcus's generosity, about his legacy. That was when Brad leaned in. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the coffin, a mask of grief on his face, but his voice was a venomous hiss right in my ear. "You are all alone now, Otis. The guest house is getting renovated next week. You might want to start looking for a shelter." I stayed silent, staring straight ahead. Emboldened by my lack of reaction, he twisted the knife deeper. "Don't worry, old man. I will spend his millions better than he did. Jessica and I have big plans." Rage, hot and blinding, surged through my chest. I gripped my cane, ready to swing it across his smug jaw right there in the house of God. But then it happened. Heh, heh, heh. It was faint, but unmistakable. It was a dry, rhythmic chuckle. It was the sound Marcus made when he solved a complex coding problem. And it was coming directly from the mahogany casket sitting 6 feet in front of us. The silence that followed was instant and terrifying. The priest stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. A woman in the third row gasped loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. Brad froze, his face draining of color faster than I had ever seen. "It's impossible," Jessica shrieked, shattering the quiet. She jumped to her feet, clutching her chest, her performance of the grieving widow momentarily forgotten in favor of sheer terror. "He is dead. I saw him die." The coffin remained still, but the air in the room felt electrified. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a sudden sharp clarity. A memory flashed in my mind, vivid and urgent. 2 months ago, I was in Marcus's lab. He was showing me his new voice authentication system. I remembered him saying, "Dad, true security is about presence even when you are absent. My technology can project presence from the grave if it has to." He had looked at me with a seriousness that I didn't understand back then. This wasn't a miracle. This was a signal. I pushed myself up, ignoring the shooting pain in my hip. "I am opening it," I announced, my voice booming with the command presence I hadn't used since my days in the Corps. "No," Jessica screamed, throwing herself between me and the casket. Her eyes were wide, manic. "You cannot. It is disrespectful. You are desecrating his memory." "Get out of my way, woman," I growled, taking a step forward. "If my son is laughing, he isn't resting." The church erupted into chaos. People were standing on pews, phones out, recording. The priest dropped his Bible. Security guards in black suits, men hired by Brad, started rushing down the aisle toward us. "Mr. King, please sit down," one of the guards shouted, reaching for my arm. I shoved him back. "I want to see my son." Jessica was trembling, but she stood her ground, her back pressed against the polished wood of the coffin, as if she were trying to physically keep the lid down. Her reaction was wrong. A grieving wife who hears her dead husband laugh should be hopeful, confused, maybe even relieved. She shouldn't be terrified. She shouldn't be acting like a prison warden guarding a cell. Sirens began to wail outside. Someone had called the police. The chaotic energy in the room was suffocating. Brad had recovered from his initial shock and was now trying to take control, signaling the guards to surround me. He grabbed Jessica's arm, pulling her slightly away from the coffin as the police burst through the heavy oak doors of the cathedral. In the confusion with the crowd roaring and the police shouting orders for everyone to remain calm, Brad thought he was safe. He thought the noise covered his voice. He pulled Jessica close, his lips brushing her ear, but I was standing right there. My hearing might be the only thing age hasn't taken from me. I heard him perfectly. He didn't say, "Is it a ghost?" He didn't say. "Is he alive?" Brad hissed. "You said you injected enough to stop an elephant. How is he making noise?" And in that split second, as the police officers grabbed my arms to restrain me, the grief in my heart evaporated. It was replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. My son didn't die of a heart attack, as the autopsy said. He was murdered. And the two people who killed him were standing right in front of me, thinking they had won. I stopped struggling against the officers. I looked at Brad, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who just identified his target. Let them take me, I thought. Let them think I am just a crazy, grief-stricken old man, because now I know the truth. And I knew exactly what Marcus was trying to tell me with that laugh. The game had just begun. The medical examiner didn't share my hope. He stood over the open casket right there in the church vestibule, his stethoscope hanging loose around his neck like a noose. I watched his lips move, pronouncing the words that crushed the tiny spark of rebellion in my chest. Cardiac arrest. Massive. Irreversible. He is gone, Mr. King. My son was still dead. The laugh we had all heard wasn't a resurrection. It was a recording. The police found a small, high-tech speaker device tucked into the satin lining of the pillow right next to Marcus's cold ear. A final prank, Jessica sobbed to the officers, burying her face in Brad's shoulder. Just like him, always playing games even at the end. The crowd murmured in agreement. Poor Marcus, eccentric to the last breath. But I knew my son. He had a sense of humor, yes, but he never played games without a strategy. That device wasn't a prank. It was a beacon. It was a dead man's switch triggered to get my attention when I needed it most. And I needed it right now. Because the moment the examiner signed the death certificate, Jessica stopped crying. The transition was so abrupt it was almost mechanical. She reached into her black Chanel purse and pulled out a document that looked like it had been prepared days in advance. "I want the cremation done immediately," she told the funeral director, her voice steady and loud enough for me to hear. "Direct cremation. No viewing. No delay. I have the paperwork right here signed by Marcus himself 3 years ago." 3 years ago, I stepped forward, my cane clacking loudly on the marble floor. Marcus never wanted to be cremated. He bought a plot next to his mother at Oak Hill. We picked the headstone together. Jessica didn't even look at me. She just waved the paper at the funeral director. "It is a notarized amendment, Otis. People change their minds. The hearse is outside. I want him in the retort within the hour. It is what he would have wanted. A clean break. A clean break." She didn't want closure. She wanted ashes. She wanted to turn the only evidence of murder into dust and smoke before anyone could run a toxicology screen that wasn't on the standard payroll. The funeral director, a nervous little man who clearly didn't want to upset the billionaire widow, nodded and signaled his team to close the lid. Over my dead body, I growled. I didn't think. I moved. For a 75-year-old man with a titanium hip, I moved faster than I had in a decade. I pushed past the stunned mourners and marched out the heavy double doors into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The hearse was idling at the curb, its back doors open, waiting to swallow my son. I planted myself directly behind the vehicle. I slammed the rubber tip of my cane onto the asphalt and widened my stance. I was a barrier of old bone and stubborn pride. "Move the car!" Mr. King, Brad shouted, coming down the steps. He wasn't whispering anymore. He looked panicked. "You will have to run me over," I shouted back, staring him dead in the eye. "And I know you don't have the guts to do it yourself, Brad. You just hire people for the dirty work." The funeral director looked terrified. Jessica was screaming at the police officers to remove me. She was hysterical, screeching about how I was traumatizing her, how I was a senile old man, ruining the ceremony. 2 officers started walking toward me, their hands hovering near their belts. I knew I couldn't fight them physically. I was an engineer, not a brawler. I built structures that lasted, and right now I needed a legal structure that could withstand a hurricane. My hand trembled as I fished my phone from my pocket. I didn't dial 911. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. "Sheriff Miller," I said the moment the line picked up. "It is Otis. I am cashing in the favor." Miller was retired now, but in Georgia, the title of sheriff never really fades. He still played poker with every judge in the county. "I need an emergency injunction, Jim. They are trying to burn Marcus. They are rushing a cremation on a suspicious death. I need a halt order, now." I heard Jim's deep voice on the other end, calm and reassuring. "Where are you, Otis St. Mark's? I am standing in front of the hearse. I don't know how long I can hold them. I have Judge Reynolds on speed dial. Give me 5 minutes. Don't move." I hung up and looked at the approaching officers. I remembered the day Marcus graduated from law school. I had taught him how to polish his boots, how to look a man in the eye, how to hold a line when everything was falling apart. That was the soldier in me. But that day in his cap and gown, Marcus had handed me his diploma and said, "Dad, you taught me that discipline is a shield. But I am going to teach you that the law is a sword. If you know how to swing it, you can cut down giants." I gripped my cane. I was swinging the sword now, son. "Get away from the vehicle, sir," the officer commanded, grabbing my shoulder. I didn't budge. "I am the father of the deceased," I shouted, my voice cracking with the strain, "and I am suspecting foul play. If you move this body before the court order arrives, you are tampering with evidence in a homicide investigation." The word homicide made the officer hesitate. He looked back at Jessica. She was pale, her nails digging into Brad's arm. "He is lying," she shrieked. "He is dementia-ridden. Just get him out of here." But the doubt had been planted, and that doubt bought me the 5 minutes I needed. A black sedan screeched into the church driveway, followed by a county sheriff's cruiser. A deputy hopped out, waving a piece of paper. "Stop," the deputy yelled. "We have a judicial order from Judge Reynolds. All disposition of the remains of Marcus King is halted pending a full independent autopsy." The air went out of Jessica. She didn't scream this time, she just went completely still. It was the stillness of a predator calculating its next move. The hearse driver shut off the engine. My son wasn't going to the fire. Not today. I slumped against the back of the hearse, my legs finally giving out. I had won, or so I thought. 2 hours later, the rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my suit. I took a taxi back to the estate, exhausted but determined to get back into the guest house and rest. I needed to think. I needed to plan my next move against Brad. But when I put my key into the lock of the guest house door, it didn't turn. I frowned and tried again. Jiggled it. Nothing. The lock had been changed. A shadow fell over me. I turned to see 2 large men in security uniforms standing on the patio. Brad's private security. "You can't be here, Mr. King," one of them said, his voice flat. "This is my home," I said, rain dripping from the brim of my hat. "I have lived here for 10 years. "Not anymore," the guard replied. He handed me a plastic bag. It contained my medication and a change of clothes. "Mrs. King has filed a temporary restraining order. She claims your behavior at the funeral made her fear for her safety. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of the property or the widow." I stared at him, the plastic bag heavy in my hand. Jessica had played her card. I stopped the cremation, so she took away my shelter. She knew I had no savings. She knew I had nowhere to go. She was counting on the cold and the humiliation to break me. I looked up at the main house. The lights were on. I could see silhouettes moving in the window of Marcus's study. Brad and Jessica probably toasting to their victory. I didn't yell. I didn't beg the guards. I took the plastic bag and turned around. I walked down the long, winding driveway in the pouring rain, my hip burning with every step. They thought this was the end. They thought throwing an old man out into the street would finish him. But as I walked through the iron gates and onto the public road, I felt something in my pocket vibrate. It was my phone. A text message. From Marcus. I stopped under a flickering street lamp and wiped the rain from the screen. "Dad, if you are reading this, it means they made their move. Don't go to the bank. They are watching the accounts. Go to the diner on 4th Street. Order the midnight special. And bring your laptop." I looked back at the mansion one last time. I was homeless. I was broke. I was 75 years old. And I was just getting started. The rain in Atlanta does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. I walked for 3 miles that night, my Italian leather shoes squelching with every step, ruining the only pair of dress shoes I owned. My hip was screaming, a hot iron rod jammed into my socket, but I refused to stop. I could not stop. To stop was to admit that at 75 years old, after serving my country and raising a billionaire son, I was a vagrant. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and bulletproof glass at the reception. I just needed a dry bed and a moment to close my eyes. I pulled out my wallet, my fingers stiff from the cold, and handed my credit card to the night manager. He was a young kid with headphones around his neck, barely looking up from his phone. He swiped the card, then he swiped it again. "Declined," he said, popping his gum. "Try it again," I said, my voice steady despite the shivering. "It is a platinum card. There is a $50,000 limit." The kid looked at the screen, then looked at me with a sudden sharpness. "It says here the card was reported stolen, sir. I have to keep it." "Stolen." Brad moved fast. He hadn't just cut me off, he had flagged me as a criminal. If I argued, this kid would call the police. And right now, the police were the last people I wanted to see. I snatched the card back from the counter before the kid could react. "It is a mistake," I muttered, turning around and walking back out into the storm. I checked my wallet. $42 in cash. That was my net worth. The billionaire's father had $42 to his name. I found an all-night diner 3 blocks away. The fluorescent lights were humming loudly, smelling of burnt coffee and grease. I took a booth in the back corner away from the window. I ordered a black coffee and told the waitress to keep it coming. I placed my battered old laptop on the table. It was a brick compared to the sleek devices Marcus used to design, but it was military grade, rugged, reliable, just like me. I was trying to figure out where to go, who to call, when my phone vibrated against the Formica table. It was a long, sustained vibration. Not a call, not a normal text. I looked at the screen. The sender ID made my breath hitch in my throat. Marcus. My thumb hovered over the screen. My son was in a morgue drawer awaiting a delayed cremation. This had to be a cruel joke. Brad taunting me. But I opened it. The message was simple. "Dad, if you are getting this, the dead man switch has been activated. It means I am gone. And it means the person who killed me was standing close enough to the coffin to trigger the proximity sensor. Do not trust the tears. Trust the code." Below the text was a hyperlink, a secure server address. I looked around the diner. A trucker was eating pie at the counter. The waitress was refilling sugar dispensers. No one was watching. I opened the laptop connected to the diner's spotty Wi-Fi and typed in the link. The screen went black, then a green command prompt appeared. It wasn't a website, it was a direct portal to a private server. "Welcome user 0, the text read. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Marcus had built a back door. He knew they were coming for him. I felt a surge of pride mixed with devastating sorrow. He hadn't told me, but he had prepared me. Then a prompt flashed on the screen. "Enter password." I paused. Marcus and I didn't have secrets, or so I thought. I tried his birthday. Access denied. I tried his mother's name. Access denied. I tried the name of his first company. Access denied. A hint appeared below the blinking cursor. Hint. The name of the child who was never born. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a mocking eye. The child who was never born. I sat back in the booth, the heat of the coffee cup burning my palms. I racked my brain. Jessica and Marcus never had children. They had tried, or so they said, but it never happened. Was there a miscarriage I didn't know about? Was there a secret lover? I typed in every name I could think of. Biblical names, family names, even the names of our old dogs. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. System lockdown in 3 attempts. I froze. If I failed 3 more times, the data would self-destruct. The truth about my son's murder would vanish. I realized then, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that I didn't know the answer. My son, the boy I taught to shave the man I walked down the aisle, had a secret so profound he used it as the key to his life's work. And I was completely in the dark. Who was this child? Why did Marcus grieve for a baby I never knew existed? The waitress walked by and refilled my cup. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at her, my eyes tired and red. "I am looking for one," I whispered. I couldn't guess. The risk was too high. I needed to find out the truth about this unborn child, and to do that I had to go back into the belly of the beast. I had to find out what Jessica was hiding in her medical history. I closed the laptop. I had $40 left. I couldn't afford a hotel, but I could afford a taxi to the one place where secrets are kept on paper. The hospital archives where Jessica claimed to have her fertility treatments. But as I stood up, the diner TV caught my eye. It was the late-night news. Breaking news, the anchor announced. Billionaire widow Jessica King announces miraculous pregnancy hours after husband's death. I stopped dead in my tracks. She claims it is a miracle, the anchor continued. The final gift from the late tech mogul. I looked down at my laptop. The password hint. The child who was never born. And now suddenly a child appears. The pieces didn't fit. If she was pregnant now, why was the password about a child who was never born? Unless this pregnancy was a lie. Or unless the unborn child was from the past, a ghost that haunted Marcus and Jessica's marriage. I grabbed my bag. The fatigue was gone. I wasn't just a homeless old man anymore. I was a detective with a lead. I walked out of the diner into the rain. I wasn't going to the hospital. I was going back to the mansion. I needed to see the nursery. I needed to see what they were building in the room that was supposed to be empty. The news report played on a loop in my mind as I stood in the shadow of the weeping willow tree at the edge of the estate. Jessica was on every channel. I could see the glow of the television vans parked outside the main gate, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like hungry mouths. I pulled my collar up against the rain and watched through the iron fence. Jessica was standing on the front steps, bathed in the harsh white light of the cameras. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She was wearing white, a symbol of purity, a symbol of new life. I am carrying Marcus's legacy, she told the reporters, her hand resting gently on her flat stomach. It is a miracle, a final gift from my beloved husband, the only heir to King Sentinel. The reporters ate it up. They flashed their cameras, blinding and rapid. Beside her, Brad stood like a stoic guardian, nodding solemnly. To the world, it was a heartwarming tragedy. To me, it was the final piece of the puzzle. That password hint, the name of the child who was never born. I knew my son. I knew him better than anyone. And I remembered a Sunday afternoon 6 months ago. We were sitting on the porch of the guest house drinking iced tea. Marcus had been quiet, staring out at the manicured lawn where Jessica was sunbathing. He looked at me, his eyes full of a profound sadness, and said, "Dad, she thinks I don't know. She tells me she is trying to get pregnant. She tells me she is tracking her cycle. But I found the pills in her vanity. She has been on birth control for 5 years. She doesn't want my child. She just wants the life I provide." I had told him to confront her. He had just shaken his head and said, "I am handling it, Dad. In my own way." Now, watching her perform for the cameras, I understood. She wasn't pregnant, or if she was, that child didn't share a drop of king blood. This was her checkmate. If she had an heir, she controlled the trust fund forever. She could cut me out, sell the company, and live like a queen with Brad. I couldn't walk through the front gate. Brad had doubled the security. Men in tactical gear were patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. They were looking for an intruder on foot. They weren't looking for a ghost in the walls. I didn't build this mansion, but I reviewed the blueprints when Marcus bought it. I knew about the old service ventilation system that ran beneath the foundation, a relic from when the property was an industrial estate in the 20s. It was tight, dirty, and dangerous. Perfect. I skirted the edge of the property, moving through the dense azalea bushes until I found the grate hidden behind the generator unit. It was rusted shut. I used a metal bar I found in the landscaping shed to pry it open. The screech of metal on metal sounded like a gunshot in the night, but the thunder overhead masked it. I dropped into the darkness. The tunnel smelled of mold and wet earth. It was barely 3 feet wide. For a young man, this would be uncomfortable. For a 75-year-old man with a bad hip, it was torture. Every crawl was a battle against my own body. My knees scraped against the rough concrete. My hip throbbed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. But I kept crawling. I thought of Marcus in that box. I thought of that laugh. He had left me a trail, and I would not fail him. I crawled for what felt like hours until I reached the vent that opened into the library, Marcus's private sanctuary. I peered through the slats. The room was dark, illuminated only by the lightning flashing outside. It was empty. I pushed the vent cover open and lowered myself onto the plush carpet, gasping for air. I was covered in cobwebs and grime, a stark contrast to the pristine luxury around me. I went straight to his desk. I didn't look for a computer. Brad would have wiped it. I didn't look for a safe. Brad would have drilled it. I looked for the one place Marcus told me he kept the things that truly mattered, the painting. On the wall behind his desk hung a chaotic abstract painting of a storm at sea. Jessica hated it. She called it ugly. But Marcus loved it because he said it reminded him of me. Chaos on the surface structure underneath. I gripped the heavy frame and swung it away from the wall. There was no safe behind it, just a flat envelope taped to the back of the canvas. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It wasn't money, it wasn't a will. It was a medical file from the Atlanta Center for Men's Health. Dr. Arrington, urologist. I pulled out the single sheet of paper and held it up to the lightning flash. Patient Marcus King. Procedure vasectomy. Date November 12, 2021. Notes. Procedure successful. Patient is permanently sterile. I stared at the paper, the truth hitting me harder than any physical blow. 2 years ago. Marcus had sterilized himself 2 years ago. He knew. He knew she was lying about trying to conceive, so he made sure it was physically impossible. The child who was never born. That was the password. The answer wasn't a name. The answer was the truth. The answer was impossible. I pulled out my laptop right there on the floor. I typed it into the prompt. Impossible. Access granted. The screen flooded with green text. Files began to decrypt. Financial records, emails, audio logs. But before I could click on the first file, the heavy oak doors of the library creaked open. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. "Who is there?" a voice boomed. It wasn't Brad. It was the head of security. I scrambled behind the heavy mahogany desk, clutching the medical file to my chest. I was trapped. If they found me now with this paper, they wouldn't just arrest me. Jessica couldn't let this proof exist. If they found me, I would join my son in the ground before sunrise. I held my breath, listening to the heavy boots step onto the carpet, coming closer and closer. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness and hit me square in the face, blinding me instantly. I threw my arm up, shielding my eyes, but it was too late. I was exposed. Intruder located in the library, the head of security barked into his radio. He didn't recognize me. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. To him, I was just a target. I heard the crackle of static and then Brad's voice, cold and distorted through the earpiece. It was a voice stripped of all pretense. "Is he armed?" "Negative?" The guard replied, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "It is the old man. Otis King. He is hiding behind the desk." There was a pause. A long, terrifying silence that hung in the air like smoke. Then Brad spoke again, and his words chilled me more than the grave I had stood over that morning. "We have had a series of break-ins in the area, violent ones. If an intruder is found in the residence, you are authorized to use lethal force to protect the homeowner. Do you understand me?" Treat him as a hostile threat. I understood. Oh, I understood perfectly. Brad wasn't just kicking me out. He was ordering an execution. He was going to frame my murder as a botched burglary. A senile old man breaks into his dead son's house and gets shot by security. It was a clean narrative. The guard unholstered his weapon. The click of the safety coming off was the loudest sound in the room. "I am sorry, Mr. King," he said, raising the gun. "I didn't beg. I didn't freeze. I am a combat engineer. When we are cornered, we don't surrender. We change the environment." I dropped to the floor just as the first shot rang out, shattering the bust of Caesar on the bookshelf behind me. I rolled under the heavy oak desk, my hand slapping against the hidden panel Marcus had shown me years ago. It wasn't a panic button for the police. It was a local override for the house's central nervous system. "Sentinel," I screamed, my voice cracking. Protocol Jericho Marcus had named it after the walls tumbling down. He had built it for fun, a way to mess with his friends during parties, but he had engineered it with military precision. The response was instantaneous. The lights in the library didn't just turn off. They were killed. The room plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. Simultaneously, the heavy motorized blinds slammed shut over the windows with a sound like a guillotine dropping, cutting off the moonlight. The guard shouted, blinded and confused. He fired another shot wildly into the dark. It embedded itself in the floorboards inches from my knee. I didn't stay still. I knew this room. I knew that 3 feet to my left was the biometric floor safe. I scrambled on my hands and knees, ignoring the agonizing protest of my hip. I found the scanner by touch. I pressed my thumb against the cold glass. "Please," I whispered. Marcus had set my biometrics as a backup admin. Please let me still be in the system. A soft beep, a mechanical whir. The safe popped open. Inside there was no cash, just a single ruggedized external hard drive, the black box. Marcus had told me once that if King Sentinel ever fell, the backup of every dirty secret was on a drive that could survive a nuclear blast. I grabbed it, shoving it into my jacket pocket. I heard the guard stumbling, cursing his flashlight beam, swinging erratically in the pitch black. He was communicating with the others. Sector 4. He is in Sector 4. Cut him off at the hallway. I needed a diversion. I crawled toward the door, staying low. Sentinel, I commanded again. Activate intruder defense. Hallway B. From outside the library, I heard the sudden, violent hiss of the fire suppression system. Not a sprinkle, but a deluge. High-pressure water blasted into the hallway, creating an instant slip and slide and filling the air with a thick, impenetrable mist. I heard heavy boots slipping on marble bodies hitting the floor and shouts of confusion. I took my chance. I lunged out of the library, moving into the chaotic hallway. The water soaked me instantly, weighing down my clothes, but the mist covered my escape. I could see the beams of flashlights cutting through the fog like lightsabers, chaotic and searching. There he is, someone shouted. I turned toward the kitchen. It was the only way to the service exit. I ran. I ran with a limp, my breath tearing at my lungs like broken glass. I was 75 years old, running for my life in the house my son bought to keep me safe. I burst into the kitchen. 3 guards were coming in from the dining room side. I was cut off. Sentinel kitchen blackout strobe effect. The kitchen lights began to flash violently, a disorienting strobe at 10 cycles per second. It was designed to induce nausea and confusion. The guards stumbled, covering their eyes. I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the counter, my only weapon, and swung it with all the desperate strength of a father who has nothing left to lose. It connected with the arm of the nearest guard, knocking the gun from his hand. He howled in pain. I didn't stop to fight. I threw the skillet through the glass of the patio door, shattering it. I dove through the broken glass, tumbling onto the wet grass of the backyard. I felt a sharp, searing pain tear across my left arm as I landed. I didn't know if it was a shard of glass or a bullet. I couldn't look. I scrambled to my feet, the warm blood already soaking through my jacket sleeve. Stop him! Shoot him! Brad's voice was screaming from the balcony above. A bullet kicked up the dirt near my heel. Then another whizzed past my ear close enough that I felt the displacement of air. I sprinted toward the dense tree line that bordered the estate. Every step was agony. My hip felt like it was grinding bone on bone. My heart was fluttering in my chest, a bird trapped in a cage. But I had the drive. I could feel the hard rectangular weight of it against my ribs. I threw myself into the thicket of rhododendrons, the thorns tearing at my face and clothes. I didn't stop until I was deep in the woods, until the shouts of the guards faded into the distance, drowned out by the thunder and the rain. I collapsed against the trunk of an old oak tree, sliding down until I hit the mud. I gasped for air, clutching my bleeding arm. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaking shock. I pulled the hard drive out of my pocket. It was wet, covered in mud, and my own blood. But the little blue light on the side was still blinking faintly. It was alive. I looked back toward the mansion. It was glowing on the hill, a fortress of lies. They had the money. They had the power. They had the guns. But I had the truth. I ripped a strip of cloth from my shirt and tied it tight around my arm to stem the bleeding. I grit my teeth against the pain. I wasn't dead yet. And as long as there was breath in my lungs, Brad Sterling was not going to spend a single dime of my son's money in peace. The cat and mouse game was over. Now the hunter became the hunted. I was a bleeding ghost walking through the neon rain of downtown Atlanta. My left arm was wrapped in a darker, blood-soaked rag, and my hip felt like it was grinding glass with every step. But I didn't feel the pain. All I could feel was the cold, rectangular weight of the hard drive pressed against my ribs. It was the black box of my son's life, and right now it was nothing more than a paperweight. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Brad owned them. I couldn't go to a regular computer shop. They wouldn't know what to do with military-grade encryption. I needed someone who existed in the shadows. I needed Tanya. 3 years ago, Marcus had called me in the middle of the night. He had caught a 19-year-old kid hacking into King Sentinel's payroll system. Instead of sending her to federal prison, he hired her. He said she had a mind like a diamond sharp and impossible to break. When Brad took over, he fired her on day 1. He knew she was loyal to Marcus, and loyalty was a liability in Brad's new world. I found her in the back of a dilapidated electronics repair shop in Little 5 Points. The air smelled of solder and stale energy drinks. Tanya was hunched over a workbench, her purple hair falling over her face as she welded a circuit board. She looked up when the bell chimed and her eyes went wide. "Mr. King," she whispered, dropping her soldering iron. "You look like hell." I didn't have time for pleasantries. I locked the door behind me and pulled the blinds. I placed the muddy, blood-stained hard drive on the counter between us. "I need you to open this, Tanya." She looked at the drive and then she looked at me with genuine fear. "That is a Sentinel Black drive. That is Marcus's personal backup. If I touch that, Brad's cybersecurity team will be on me in 10 minutes. They have trackers embedded in the code." "I know," I said, my voice raspy. "That is why I need you to do it offline. Air-gapped, no internet, just you and the code." She shook her head, backing away. "No. No way. I saw the news, Otis. They are saying you lost your mind. They are saying you are dangerous. If Brad finds out I helped you, I won't just go to jail. I will disappear. I have a little sister to take care of. I can't risk it." I reached into my pocket. I didn't have my wallet. I didn't have my checkbook. But I had the one thing I had kept safe since 1975. I pulled out my gold retirement watch. It wasn't just a watch. It was a Rolex day date given to me by the platoon I commanded in Vietnam. It was the only thing of value I had left in this world. I slammed the watch onto the counter next to the drive. "It is solid gold, Tanya. It is worth $20,000 at any pawn shop in the city. It is yours." She looked at the watch, then back at my face. It wasn't greed I saw in her eyes. It was hesitation. "Take it," I urged. "Take it and get your sister out of town. But open the drive first. Please. You are the only one he trusted. He saved you, Tanya. Now I need you to save him." She stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then she let out a shaky breath and grabbed the drive. "Keep your watch, old man," she muttered, plugging the drive into a massive, isolated server tower under her desk. "If we die tonight, I don't want to die rich. I want to die right." She began to type. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, a blur of motion. Screens lit up with cascading red text. "It is encrypted with a polymorphic algorithm," she said, her eyes darting across the code. "It changes every time you try to crack it. Marcus was a genius. This is beautiful and terrifying." "How long?" I asked, watching the progress bar crawl forward. "If I brute force it, 100 years. But I know how Marcus thinks. He always left a back door for himself, a rhythm." She closed her eyes for a second, tapping her fingers on the desk. Then she typed a single string of code. The screen flashed green. "I am in," she whispered. "Layer 1 is down." A video file popped up on the main monitor. It was dated 6 months ago. The timestamp was 7 in the morning. I leaned in, my heart hammering against my ribs. The video showed the kitchen of the mansion. It was high definition, clear as day. I saw Marcus sitting at the island reading a newspaper on his tablet. He looked healthy, strong. Then Jessica walked into the frame. She was wearing a silk robe. She looked like the perfect loving wife. She walked to the blender and started making his morning protein smoothie. I watched, holding my breath. She put in the kale, the berries, the protein powder. Then she glanced over her shoulder at Marcus. He wasn't looking. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small, unmarked vial. She uncapped it and poured 3 drops of a clear liquid into the blender. My knees gave out. I had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. There it was, the proof. The murder weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was breakfast. Tanya gasped. "Oh my God. That is thallium. Or arsenic. Something slow." On the screen, Jessica poured the smoothie into a glass and walked over to Marcus. She kissed him on the forehead, smiling that sweet, innocent smile. "Here you go, darling," she said. The audio was crisp. "Drink up. You need your strength." Marcus took the glass. He smiled back at her. "Thank you, honey." I wanted to scream at the screen. I wanted to reach through time and slap the glass from his hand. "Don't drink it, son. She is killing you." But I could only watch as my son took a long swallow of the poison that would eventually stop his heart. Suddenly the video froze. It glitched, pixelating into static. "What happened?" I demanded. "Play it back, I can't," Tanya said, her voice rising in panic. The screen had turned red. A new message was blinking in the center. "Access denied. Biometric mismatch. Secondary physical key required." "What does that mean?" I shouted. "It means the data is partitioned," Tanya explained, typing furiously. "We only unlocked the preview. The full archive, the toxicology reports, the financial transfers, the proof that links Brad to this. It is all behind a second wall. Marcus didn't trust digital security alone. He made a physical key, a hardware token. "Where is it?" I asked. Tanya pulled up a schematic of the key. It looked like a small silver USB drive, but with a unique, intricate engraving on the side. I squinted at the screen. The engraving. It was a lion holding a sword. I recognized it instantly. It wasn't just a random design. It was the family crest I had carved into a wooden toy soldier I gave Marcus when he was 6 years old. He had turned that memory into the key to his empire, and I knew exactly where it was. It wasn't in the house. It wasn't in the bank. When Marcus was a boy, we had a secret hiding spot, a place where we buried time capsules, a place where we went when the world got too loud. I looked at Tanya. "I know where the key is." "Where?" she asked. I grabbed my watch from the counter and strapped it back on my wrist. I felt a surge of cold determination. "It is in the one place Jessica would never set foot," I said. "It is in the mud." I turned to the door. The video had given me the why. Now I had to go get the how. But as I reached for the handle, Tanya's computer let out a piercing alarm. "They found us," she said, her face draining of color. "The tracker. It just pinged. Brad's team is 2 minutes away." "Run," I told her. I didn't wait. I kicked the back door open and vanished into the alleyway just as the tires of black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the shop. I had a head start, but they had the speed. The race for the key had just begun. I kept running until the sirens faded into the distance, blending with the rhythmic thrum of the city rain. I was an old man with a bad hip and a $20 million secret in his pocket, moving through the alleyways of Atlanta like a stray dog. I couldn't go back to the motel. I couldn't go to the bank. I was cut off from the world I had known for the last decade. I found refuge in a 24-hour laundromat 3 miles from Tanya's shop. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the linoleum floor. I huddled in the corner near the dryers, pretending to wait for a load of clothes I didn't have just to soak up a little warmth. My clothes were damp, sticking to my skin, and the makeshift bandage on my arm was throbbing in time with my heartbeat. On the wall above the folding tables, a television was playing the 11 o'clock news. I looked up and my breath caught in my throat. There was my face. It wasn't a photo of a grieving father. It was a mugshot from 40 years ago, back when I was arrested for a civil rights protest. Grainy, angry, dangerous. Otis King. The reporter's voice was crisp and devoid of empathy, as wanted for questioning in connection with a break-in at the King estate and the theft of proprietary corporate data. Police warn that he may be armed and suffering from an acute mental health episode. Do not approach. Armed and dangerous. Mental health episode. Brad played his cards perfectly. He didn't just frame me as a thief. He framed me as a senile, violent black man who had snapped. He tapped into every prejudice, every fear that society holds, and he wrapped it around my neck like a noose. If a police officer saw me now, they wouldn't ask questions. They would see the threat the news promised them, and they would shoot. I pulled my cap lower over my eyes. A woman folding sheets at the next table glanced at me. I saw her eyes linger. I saw the recognition spark. I didn't wait. I grabbed my laptop bag and walked out, head down, back into the cold downpour. I walked for hours. I walked through neighborhoods where the houses had bars on the windows, places where the police sirens were just background noise. This was the Atlanta I grew up in, the Atlanta I thought I had left behind when Marcus bought the mansion. But the streets remember, and right now the streets were the only place that wouldn't judge me. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. I had spent my life following the rules. I served in the Army Corps of Engineers, I paid my taxes, I raised a son who changed the world, and yet at 75 I was being hunted by the very system I believed in. I was just another nameless old man in the dark, fighting a giant that had infinite eyes and infinite money. My phone, which I had turned off to avoid tracking, felt like a brick in my pocket. I knew I couldn't turn it on, but I needed help. I needed a lawyer who wasn't on Brad's payroll. I found myself standing in front of an old payphone outside a shuttered gas station. I didn't even know they still existed. I fumbled for some loose change. I didn't dial a law firm. I dialed the number of the only man in this city who owed Marcus nothing but respected him more than anyone. Reggie's barbershop. It rang 4 times. "Yeah." "We closed," a gruff voice answered. "Reggie." "It is Otis," I whispered, shielding the mouthpiece from the wind. The line went silent for a long moment. Then Otis. "Man, you are all over the TV. They saying you lost your mind. They saying you stole the keys to the kingdom. Do you believe them?" "Reg," I asked, my voice trembling with exhaustion. I heard the familiar sound of clippers buzzing in the background. "I believe a man who raised Marcus King doesn't steal. I believe a man who served his country doesn't crack without a reason." "Where are you?" "I am nowhere," I said, "and I need a place to sit down before I fall down." "Back door is open," Reggie said. "Come home, Otis." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a barber chair in the back of the darkened shop. Reggie, a man as old and gray as I was, didn't ask questions. He just handed me a towel and a glass of bourbon. He cleaned the wound on my arm with witch hazel and wrapped it properly. "You can't stay here long, Otis," Reggie said softly, sharpening a razor on a leather strop. "Police are tearing the city apart. Brad Sterling has put a bounty on you. Private investigators are crawling the streets." "I know," I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked old. I looked tired, but I didn't look crazy. I just need to think. I need to figure out how to unlock this drive without Tanya. There was a knock on the back door, a specific rhythm. 3 quick taps, 1 slow. I froze. I looked at Reggie. He didn't look surprised. "I didn't call the cops." "Otis," Reggie said, walking to the door. "But I did make a call. To the one person Marcus told me to call if things ever went sideways." Reggie unlocked the door. A man stepped in from the rain. He was tall, wearing a trench coat that looked like it cost more than this entire block. He shook his umbrella, folded it, and looked at me with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. It was Elias Holloway, Marcus's personal attorney, the man who wrote the contracts, the man who supposedly worked for King Sentinel. I stood up, grabbing the cast-iron letter opener from the counter. "You," I spat. "You work for Brad. You are here to finish the job." Holloway raised his hands calmly. He didn't look afraid. He looked relieved. "Put the opener down," Mr. King Holloway said, his voice smooth and precise. "I don't work for Brad. I work for the King Trust, and right now Brad is trying to burn that trust to the ground." He reached into his coat pocket. I tensed, ready to fight. But he didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a sleek black envelope sealed with red wax. "Marcus came to see me 2 days before he died," Holloway said. "He gave me this. He told me that if he died and if you were still alive, I was to wait until you had the black box." He pointed to the hard drive sitting on the barber station. "You have the drive," Holloway said. "I have the instructions. Brad thinks he has won because he controls the company. But Marcus built a fail-safe that Brad doesn't even know exists. It is called the Red Will." I lowered the letter opener. "The Red Will," Holloway nodded. "It is a legal nuclear weapon, Mr. King. It freezes everything. Every account, every asset, every patent. But it requires 2 signatures to activate, one from me and one from the designated protector." He looked me dead in the eye. "That is you, Otis. You are the only thing standing between Brad Sterling and billions of dollars, and that is why they are hunting you. Not because you are a thief, but because you are the lock they can't pick." I sank back into the barber chair. I wasn't just a fugitive anymore. I was the guardian. "What do we do?" I asked. Holloway smiled a thin, shark-like smile. "We stop running. We go on the offense. But first we need to disappear properly. Brad has the police. We have the truth. It is time to level the playing field." The wax seal on the envelope wasn't just red. It was crimson, the color of fresh blood. Holloway held it with a reverence that made the hair on my arms stand up. Outside, the rain was still hammering against the pavement, but inside Reggie's shop, the air was still and heavy. "This is not a standard testament," Otis Holloway said, his voice dropping an octave. "In my 30 years of practicing law, I have only drafted one of these. We call it the nuclear option. Marcus called it the Red Will." He broke the seal. The sound was sharp, like a twig snapping in a silent forest. He unfolded the document. It wasn't paper. It was a thin, flexible sheet of polymer, practically indestructible. Clause 1, Holloway read. "Upon the certification of my death, if the circumstances are deemed suspicious by my designated AI protocols, all assets, liquid and fixed, are immediately transferred to the custody of Nemesis." I looked at him confused. "Who is Nemesis?" "Not who," Holloway corrected. "What?" "Nemesis is an autonomous financial artificial intelligence. Marcus built it in secret. It doesn't sleep, It doesn't take bribes, and it doesn't negotiate. The moment that laugh played at the funeral, the Nemesis protocol was triggered. He placed the document on the counter between us. Right now, Brad Sterling and Jessica are probably sitting in the study trying to transfer millions to their offshore accounts in the Caymans. But they are finding out that the accounts don't exist anymore. Nemesis has swallowed the money. It has encrypted the entire fortune of King Sentinel into a blockchain ledger that no human can access. I felt a grim smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Marcus, my brilliant boy, he had locked the vault from the grave. So they are broke? I asked. Holloway shook his head. Worse. They are powerless. Without access to capital, the company's stocks will freeze. Their credit lines will snap. In 24 hours, they won't be able to pay the security guards hunting you. But there was a catch. There is always a catch. Holloway tapped the bottom of the document. Nemesis is designed to hold the money in purgatory until a designated protector validates the succession. That protector is you, Otis. You are the human key. You have to physically input your biometric signature into the central server to either release the funds to the next heir or what I asked. Or burn it all down, Holloway said. If you confirm foul play, Nemesis will liquidate the entire fortune and donate it to 500 different charities instantly. Brad and Jessica get 0. My chest tightened. That was it. The leverage. I held the power to turn billionaires into beggars with a single touch of my thumb. But Brad knows this. Holloway warned, his expression darkening. He was the CFO. He knows about the protector clause, even if he didn't know it was you until today. Then why frame me, I asked. Why call the police? Because of the contingency, Holloway explained. If the protector is deemed mentally incompetent, legally insane, or dead, the protocol defaults. The assets are released to the next of kin. That is Jessica. I understood then. The smear campaign on the news, the accusations of dementia. They weren't just trying to ruin my reputation, they were building a legal case to bypass me. If they could prove I was a crazy old man, they could override my authority. And if they can't prove I am crazy, I asked, already knowing the answer. Then, they have to make sure you are dead, Holloway said bluntly. As if on cue, Holloway's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face went pale. We have to move, he said, standing up abruptly. My contact at the precinct just texted. The APB on you has been upgraded. But it is not just cops. There are chatter intercepts. Brad has contacted a cleaner, a hitman. Reggie walked over from the window, a straight razor still in his hand. There is a black sedan circling the block, Otis. Third time in 5 minutes. Tinted windows, no plates. They found me. I stood up. My hips screamed in protest, but the adrenaline drowned it out. I can't stay here, Reg. I won't bring this war to your doorstep. Take my car, Holloway said, tossing me a set of keys. It is the silver Lexus out back. It has bulletproof glass. Get to the safe house in Decatur. Here is the address. I grabbed the keys. I grabbed the hard drive. I looked at Reggie one last time. Keep your head down, old friend. I slipped out the back door into the pouring rain. The alleyway was dark, slick with oil and water. I found the Lexus and slid into the driver's seat. It smelled of leather and new money. I started the engine. It purred like a kitten. I pulled out onto the main road, checking my mirrors. The black sedan was there. It didn't even try to hide. It pulled out from the curb and accelerated, closing the distance. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was 75 years old. I hadn't driven aggressively since I was a young man fleeing the military police in Saigon. But the muscle memory was there. I gripped the wheel. I merged onto the highway, pushing the Lexus to 80. The sedan matched my speed. Then my phone rang. Not the burner. My old phone. The one Brad had been tracking. I answered it on the car's speaker. Hello, Otis? Brad's voice filled the cabin. Smooth. Arrogant. It is over, Brad, I said, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. The money is gone. Nemesis has it. For now, Brad laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound. But you are a reasonable man. Pull over. Sign the competency waiver. Go to a nice facility. We will take care of you. Or what I challenged. Or you have a tragic accident on a wet highway. It happens all the time to elderly drivers. Confused. Disoriented. Going the wrong way. I looked in the mirror. The sedan was right on my bumper now. I could see the grille, massive and aggressive. It was an armored SUV. "I am not confused, Brad," I growled, "and I am not stopping. Have it your way, Dad." The line went dead. Suddenly, the SUV behind me surged forward. It didn't just nudge me, it rammed me. The impact was like a bomb going off. The Lexus lurched forward, the rear tires losing traction on the wet asphalt. My head slammed against the headrest. I fought the wheel, correcting the skid. He hit me again, harder. I spun. The world turned into a blur of wet pavement and headlights. I saw the guardrail approaching fast. Beyond it was the dark void of the river below. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The Lexus smashed through the metal barrier with a scream of tearing steel, weightlessness. For a second I was flying. Then the world turned black as the car plunged into the freezing water of the Chattahoochee River. My last thought before the water rushed in was of Marcus. "I am coming, son, or I am coming back for them." The water hit the windshield like a sledgehammer. The silver Lexus plunged into the Chattahoochee River, nose first, the impact screaming through the reinforced steel frame. For a second, the world was nothing but violent noise and crushing pressure. Then silence. Absolute terrifying silence as the black water engulfed the car, swallowing me whole into the freezing darkness. My head spun. The airbag had deployed, punching me in the chest, but it saved my life. I was 75 years old, hanging upside down in a sinking metal coffin, bleeding, bruised, and terrified. But I was also a soldier. Panic is a luxury for the living, and right now I was fighting not to join the dead. I fumbled for the door handle. Locked. The electrical system had shorted out. The water was rising fast, ice-cold and murky, creeping up past the dashboard, soaking my legs. I tried to kick the window, but the bulletproof glass that Marcus had installed to keep shooters out was now keeping me trapped in. My son's protection had become my prison. But Marcus was thorough. He never built a cage without a key. I reached into the glove compartment, my fingers numb, searching blindly until I felt the cold, serrated handle of the emergency escape tool. I grabbed it. I slashed the seatbelt across my chest. I fell onto the roof of the car, the water now up to my neck. I jammed the tungsten tip of the tool into the corner of the windshield and swung with every ounce of strength I had left. Crack. The glass spiderwebbed. I hit it again and again. The water pressure blew the window inward, a torrent of freezing liquid slamming into my face. I didn't fight it. I let it take me. I pushed myself out through the jagged opening, my hips screaming in agony, and kicked toward the surface. I broke the water, gasping for air, my lungs burning. The rain was still pouring down, masking the sound of my struggle. I looked up at the bridge, towering 50 feet above me. I saw the headlights of the black SUV parked at the guardrail. I saw silhouettes looking down into the abyss. I stopped kicking. I let the current take me under the shadow of the bridge piling. I needed them to see nothing. No movement. No survivor. If they saw a head bobbing in the water, they would finish the job with a bullet. I held onto a rusted rebar jutting out of the concrete, shivering so violently my teeth chattered and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the SUV backed away. They thought it was over. They thought the river had done their dirty work. Otis King was dead. Good. Let them believe it. A dead man has no rules. A dead man cannot be threatened. I dragged myself onto the muddy bank a mile downstream, coughing up river water. I crawled into an abandoned drainage pipe that smelled of rot and decay hidden from the road. I was shivering, hypothermic and broken. But the waterproof bag holding the laptop and the hard drive was still strapped to my chest. I didn't light a fire, I didn't call for help. I opened the laptop. The battery was at 12%. Enough for a revelation. Or a death sentence. I plugged in the hard drive. I inserted the physical key, the digital copy of the family crest I had retrieved from the mud of our old-time capsule spot. The screen flickered to life. Access granted. Level 5 clearance. The files opened. I expected to see bank transfers. I expected to see proof that Brad and Jessica were stealing millions to buy yachts and villas. Adultery and embezzlement. Common greed. But as I scrolled through the spreadsheets, my blood ran colder than the river water. This wasn't just theft. This was a washing machine. Brad Sterling hadn't just been skimming off the top. He had turned King Sentinel into a massive money laundering operation for the Sinaloa cartel. I saw the names of shell companies in Panama, Macau, and Dubai. I saw transfers of $50 million listed as security consulting fees for construction projects that didn't exist. My son had found out. I saw an email in the draft folder dated 3 days before his death. It was addressed to the FBI. Subject Operation Clean Sweep. Evidence of cartel activity within King Sentinel. He was going to turn them in. That is why they killed him. It wasn't about the affair. It wasn't about the money in the will. It was about keeping the pipeline open for the most dangerous criminals on the planet. Jessica wasn't just a cheating wife. She was a conspirator in international organized crime. And Brad wasn't just a jealous executive. He was a puppet for monsters who would kill entire families without blinking. I sat back against the cold concrete of the drainage pipe, the glow of the screen illuminating my tired, wrinkled face. I looked at my hands. These hands had built bridges. They had held a baby. They had buried a son. And now they were shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a holy fire. I closed the laptop. The shivering stopped. I realized then that calling the local police would be a suicide mission. Brad owned the precinct. If I walked in there with this drive, I would never walk out. This was bigger than Atlanta. This was bigger than the law. I needed to stop playing by the rules of a system that was broken. I needed to go to war, not as a father, not as a victim, but as a soldier who had infiltrated behind enemy lines. I stood up wincing as my hip popped, but I forced myself to stand tall. I wiped the mud from my face. Otis King. The grieving father died in that river. The man who walked out of the drainage pipe was something else entirely. I was going to contact the only people who hated the cartel as much as I did. I was going to burn Brad's empire down brick by bloody brick. And I was going to start by haunting the woman who poured poison into my son's breakfast. The ghost was real now, and he was coming for them. The river didn't take me, but it washed away the man I used to be. The Otis King who believed in the system, the father who thought love was enough to hold a family together, died in that freezing water. The man who crawled out of the mud and limped into the shadows was something else entirely. I was a ghost. And being a ghost gave me a terrifying advantage. I could walk through walls. Not physical walls, but the digital firewalls Brad and Jessica thought kept them safe. I found a dry corner in the basement of an abandoned textile factory 3 blocks from the river. It was cold, smelling of rust and old, damp cotton, but it had a working power outlet. That was all I needed. My body was screaming in pain. My hip felt like it was filled with broken glass, and every breath rattled in my chest. But pain is just a signal, and I had learned to ignore signals a long time ago in the jungles of Vietnam. I opened the laptop. The waterproof casing had done its job. The screen flickered to life, casting a blue glow on my battered face. I connected to the King Sentinel network using the backdoor Marcus had built. It was surprisingly easy. Brad was so focused on physical security hiring thugs to run me off the road that he had neglected the digital perimeter. He thought the only person who knew the codes was in a coffin. I accessed the smart home system of the mansion. The cameras came online one by one. My stomach turned. I saw them. They were in the living room, the very room where I had taught Marcus to play chess. Jessica was wearing a red silk dress holding a crystal flute of champagne. Brad was pacing, looking agitated but triumphant. I turned up the volume on my laptop. "It is done," Brad was saying. "The police found the guardrail. They found the skid marks. The river is moving fast tonight. They won't find the body for days. By then, the fish will have done the work." Jessica took a sip of champagne. Her hand wasn't shaking. "Are you sure Brad Otis is resourceful? He is like a cockroach." "He is 75 years old." "Jess," Brad scoffed. "He drove off a bridge. He is dead. We won. The trust fund defaults to you tomorrow morning." I watched them toast to my death. I watched them smile. And then I saw Brad pull her close. I saw him kiss her right there in my son's house with a casual possession that made bile rise in my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I started typing. I accessed Marcus's personal email account, the one they thought was deactivated. I drafted a new message. Subject line: "I am still here." I took a screenshot of the live feed, the image of them kissing, time-stamped with today's date right this second. I attached it to the email. I added 3 words. "I am watching you." I hit send. On the screen, I saw Jessica's phone light up on the coffee table. She ignored it at first, then it buzzed again. She picked it up, probably expecting a congratulatory text from a friend. I watched her unlock the screen. The reaction was immediate. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered the sound sharp and violent even through the laptop speakers. Jessica stumbled back, her face draining of all color. She looked like she had seen a demon. What? Brad asked, spinning around. What is it? She couldn't speak. She just held the phone out to him, her hand trembling so hard the device was shaking. Brad snatched it. I saw his eyes narrow. He looked around the room, scanning the corners, scanning the ceiling. "Who is doing this?" he shouted. "It is him," Jessica whispered. Her voice was thin, terrified. "It is Marcus. Marcus is dead," Brad yelled, grabbing her shoulders. "I checked the pulse myself. This is a hack. It is a bot. Someone is messing with us." I typed again. Another email. This time I attached a photo from the hidden camera in the bedroom taken just minutes before they came downstairs. And I added a line that only Marcus would know. "Tell Brad to stop wearing my watch. It doesn't suit a thief." I watched Brad read it. He looked down at his wrist. He was wearing Marcus's Patek Philippe, the one I gave him for his 30th birthday. Brad ripped the watch off his wrist as if it burned him and threw it across the room. "He is here," Jessica screamed, backing away. "He is in the house." I could see the cracks forming. Jessica was superstitious. She was weak. Brad was arrogant, but fear works differently on arrogant men. It makes them sloppy. I decided to push harder. I needed to separate them. I needed Jessica alone. I sent a third email. Only to Jessica. "Meet me where we said goodbye. Midnight. Come alone. If you bring him, the police get the files." I saw Jessica read it. She looked at Brad, who was busy yelling at the security team on his phone, ordering a sweep of the house for bugs. She looked at him with sudden suspicion. If Brad had failed to kill me, or worse, if Brad had lied to her about Marcus being dead, she was trapped. She grabbed her purse. "Where are you going?" Brad demanded. "I need air," she snapped. "This house is suffocating me." "You are not going anywhere," Brad ordered. "I am going for a drive, Brad," she screamed back, a hysteria rising in her voice that cut through his dominance. "Unless you want me to start asking why a dead man is emailing me about your watch." She stormed out. Brad stood there fuming, but he didn't follow. He was too busy trying to figure out how the system was breached. I closed the laptop. The trap was set. The cemetery was 5 miles away. I had an hour. I was battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but I felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with adrenaline. It was the cold clarity of judgment. I stood up and checked the pistol I had taken from the glove compartment of the Lexus before it sank. 7 rounds. I wasn't going there to kill her. Death was too easy. I was going there to break her. I was going to look her in the eye and watch the realization destroy her world. The ghost was coming to the graveyard, but it wasn't Marcus who would be waiting among the tombstones. It was his father, and I was bringing hell with me. The dead do not sleep when the living are busy sinning. I lay prone on the wet roof of the maintenance shed, the cold slate pressing against my chest, watching the headlights of the black SUV cut through the cemetery fog. It was midnight. The rain had turned into a fine freezing mist that clung to everything like a shroud. I had told Jessica to come alone. I had given her a chance to show a shred of remorse. But as the car doors opened, I saw that remorse was a foreign language to these people. Jessica stepped out, shivering in a trench coat, looking around with wild, terrified eyes. But she wasn't alone. Brad stepped out from the driver's side, a shovel in one hand and a flashlight in the other. And from the back seat, a third man emerged. He was dressed in tactical black, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a professional killer. This was the cleaner. They didn't come to talk, they came to exhume. I adjusted the earpiece in my ear. "Tanya, are you seeing this?" I whispered. Loud and clear, Otis. Her voice came back, trembling slightly. "I have tapped into the cemetery's perimeter lighting and the maintenance PA system. Just give the word." "Not yet," I said, gripping the cold steel of the remote trigger in my hand. "Let them dig. Let them commit the ultimate sacrilege. I want the jury to see their hands dirty." I watched through the scope of a pair of night vision binoculars I had salvaged from my old gear. They walked toward the family plot, toward Marcus. When they reached the fresh mound of earth, Jessica stopped. She put a hand over her mouth, sobbing. Was it grief, or was it just fear of the supernatural dig Brad ordered, tossing the shovel to the cleaner? "We need to be sure," Brad said, his voice carrying over the wind. "If that coffin is empty, we have a problem. If he is in there, then this email is just the old man playing tricks and we find him and end him tonight." The cleaner struck the earth. The sound of metal hitting wet soil echoed like a gunshot. Thud, thud, thud. Each strike was a blow to my heart. My son was resting there. and these vultures were disturbing his peace because they were too arrogant to believe they could lose. I felt a rage so white-hot it almost blinded me, but I forced myself to breathe. Wait for the moment. When the hole was waist-deep, Jessica started to scream. "Stop it! Stop it! I can't take this!" I feel him watching us. "Shut up, Jess!" Brad snapped, shining the flashlight in her face. "There are no ghosts. There is only leverage, and right now we need to know if we are fighting a corpse or a hacker." That was the cue. "Now, Tanya," I commanded. Suddenly the floodlights surrounding the mausoleum to their right flickered. They didn't just turn on, they strobed. Violent, disorienting flashes of blinding white light that cut through the darkness like lightning. The cleaner dropped the shovel, reaching for his weapon. Brad spun around, aiming his flashlight into the trees. "Who is there? Come out, Otis!" Then I hit the audio. We had spent the last 2 hours splicing together Marcus's voice from hundreds of hours of keynote speeches, podcasts, and home videos. Tanya had used an AI synthesizer to fill in the gaps. The result wasn't just a recording, it was a presence. "Hello, Brad!" The voice boomed from the hidden speakers mounted on the utility poles. It was Marcus. It was his cadence, his calm, analytical tone. It sounded like it was coming from the sky, from the ground, from the air itself. Brad froze. The flashlight shook in his hand. Jessica fell to her knees in the mud. "Marcus. Oh, God, Marcus. Why are you digging?" "Brad," the voice continued. "Are you looking for the soul you sold, or are you looking for the poison?" "Show yourself!" Brad screamed, firing a shot blindly into the dark. The gunshot cracked through the air, but the silence that followed was heavier. "I don't need to show myself," the voice said. "I am the code in the network. I am the eyes in the walls. And I am the father you never were." The light shifted. They turned red. The entire section of the graveyard was bathed in a blood-colored glow. Jessica was hyperventilating now, clawing at the mud. "I am sorry I didn't want to do it. He made me shut her up," Brad roared at the cleaner. "Find the speakers." The voice ignored him. It focused on the one weak link. "Jessica, look at the grave. Look at what you did to us. You said you carried my heir. You lied to the world." "No," Jessica shrieked. "Tell the truth, Jessica." The voice commanded louder, now distorted slightly to sound deeper, more menacing. "Who does the child belong to?" It was the ultimate gamble. I was betting everything on her breaking point. Brad rushed toward her, grabbing her by the collar of her coat. "Don't say a word, you stupid cow." But Jessica was broken. The combination of the red light, the thunder, and the voice of her dead husband was too much for her fragile psyche. She pushed Brad away, scrambling backward on her hands and knees. "It is yours," she screamed, her voice tearing through the night. "It is yours, Brad. It was never Marcus's. I was never pregnant with Marcus's child. It is yours." The confession hung in the air, captured by the high-fidelity directional microphone I had planted in the tree above them. I checked the recording status on my laptop. Saved. I had it. The paternity fraud, the motive, the betrayal. Brad stood there stunned. The secret was out. He looked down at Jessica with pure disgust. "You just ruined everything." He raised his gun, not at the shadows, at Jessica. He was going to cut his losses. If she was the liability, he would remove her. I couldn't let him kill her. She was my witness. She was my prisoner. I didn't use the voice this time. I used my own. "Drop it, Brad," I shouted from the roof of the shed, racking the slide of my pistol. Brad spun around, firing wildly in my direction. Bullets chipped the stone of the shed, sending fragments flying into my face. I didn't flinch. I aimed for the spotlight above his head and fired. The bulb exploded, raining sparks and glass down on them. In the confusion, the cleaner grabbed Brad, dragging him toward the car. "We have to go. The police will be here in 3 minutes." Brad struggled, firing one last magazine into the darkness, screaming curses that would make a sailor blush. But the cleaner was stronger. He shoved Brad into the SUV. They didn't wait for Jessica. They peeled out tires, spinning in the mud, leaving the woman who had betrayed my son alone in the rain, sobbing over his partially dug-up grave. I didn't go down to her. Not yet. I watched as the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers appeared in the distance. I had called them 5 minutes ago. I closed my laptop. I had the recording. I had the fear. And I had the truth. But as I climbed down from the roof, slipping into the shadows of the forest, I knew the war wasn't over. Brad had escaped. and a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. I touched the bandage on my hip. I was tired. God, I was so tired. But I couldn't rest, not while the man who ordered the poison was still breathing free air. I looked back at Jessica one last time. She was being handcuffed by the officers screaming that a ghost had attacked them. They would put her in a cell or an asylum. Either way, she was safe from Brad for tonight. Now it was just me and him. 2 men, 1 fortune. And only 1 grave left to fill. I walked into the 4th precinct with the recording burning a hole in my pocket. I was wet, muddy, and bleeding, looking every bit the fugitive the news said I was. But I held my head high. I was a father who had just crawled through hell to fetch the truth, and I was about to lay it on the desk of the law. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the system, flawed as it was, would still bend toward justice when presented with undeniable proof. I was a fool. I demanded to see Captain Vance. He was the man who replaced my old friend Miller. A younger man, ambitious, with a jawline that looked chiseled from granite and eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. I sat in his office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and placed the USB drive on his desk. "Listen to it," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke and the shouting. "It is all there. The confession, the paternity fraud, the attempt on my life. Jessica admits everything." Captain Vance looked at me then at the drive. He didn't say a word. He plugged it into his computer. I watched his face, waiting for the shock, waiting for him to reach for his radio and order a manhunt for Brad Sterling. I waited, and I waited. Finally, Vance pulled the drive out. He looked up at me, his expression bored. "There is nothing here, Mr. King." My heart skipped a beat. "What? The drive is blank," Vance said, tossing it back to me across the desk. It slid over the polished wood and fell to the floor with a hollow clatter. "Just like your accusations." I stood up, ignoring the pain in my hip. "You are lying. I recorded it an hour ago." I checked the file. "Play it again." "Sit down," Otis Vance said, his voice hardening. "We have had a long night. We have reports of shots fired at the cemetery. We have reports of you harassing a grieving widow. And now you come in here with a blank drive and a wild story about a conspiracy." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the Rolex on his wrist. It was brand new. I saw the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "He bought you," I whispered. The realization hit me harder than the car crash. Brad didn't just buy a hitman. He bought the badge. How much was my son's life worth? "Captain, a new watch. A boat. A down payment on a vacation home." Vance stood up. "That is enough. Otis King, you are under arrest for breaking and entering stalking discharge of a firearm within city limits and filing a false police report." 2 officers were on me before I could blink. They twisted my arms behind my back. The pain in my injured shoulder was blinding white and hot, but I didn't scream. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. They slammed my face against the desk, the cold laminate pressing against my cheek. "You are making a mistake," I gritted out. "You are protecting a murderer." "Read him his rights," Vance said, turning his back on me to look out the window. "And put him in the holding cell. The general population." They didn't put me in a solitary cell for my protection. They threw me into the tank. A cage filled with 20 other men, the dregs of Atlanta's underworld. Drug dealers, thieves, violent offenders. The smell hit me first. Urine, sweat, and aggression. When the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoed like a tomb ceiling. I found a spot on a concrete bench in the corner. I sat down, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself small. I was 75 years old. I was alone. And I had lost. An hour later, the guard called my name. "King. You have a visitor." I thought it was Holloway. I thought maybe, just maybe, my lawyer had found a way to pull me out of the fire. I walked to the visitation bars. But it wasn't Holloway standing on the other side. It was Brad. He was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue, impeccable. He looked like he had just come from a spa, not a graveyard shootout. He smelled of expensive soap and arrogance. He walked up to the bars and smiled. It was the smile of a predator looking at a trapped animal. "Rough night, Dad?" he asked. I gripped the cold steel bars. "You can't kill the truth, Brad. The recording exists. There are copies." "There were copies," Brad corrected. "But my team wiped your cloud account 10 minutes ago. We wiped your laptop remotely. And thanks to Captain Vance, the physical drive is empty. You have nothing, Otis. You are just a crazy old man who snapped after his son died. That is the narrative. And the jury will eat it up." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You know, I almost feel bad for you. You fought so hard. You survived the river. You survived the house. You are a tough old bastard, but you forgot one thing. What is that? I asked, my voice steady. This is America, Brad sneered. Justice is a luxury item. You have to be able to afford it. And you are broke. I have the millions. I have the lawyers. I have the police. Money buys justice, old man. It buys the truth. It buys history. He checked his watch. The Patek Philippe was gone, replaced by something even more expensive. I have to go. Jessica is a mess. I have to get her sedated and prepped for the press conference tomorrow. We are going to announce that you suffered a psychotic break and attacked us. It will be very tragic. He turned to leave, then stopped. He looked at the guard standing by the door and gave a subtle nod. Then he looked back at the cell, at the shadowy figures of the other prisoners watching us. "Hey, boys," Brad shouted to the room. "This is Otis King, the man who killed his own son for insurance money." The atmosphere in the cell shifted instantly. It went from indifferent to hostile. In prison, child killers and family killers are the lowest of the low. Brad looked at me one last time, his eyes dead and cold. "Good luck tonight, Otis. I hear accidents happen in here all the time." He walked away, his footsteps clicking on the linoleum. I turned back to the cell. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. They were hungry. They were angry. They believed the lie because a rich man in a suit told them it was true. A man stepped forward from the shadows. He was huge, a mountain of muscle with tattoos covering his neck and face. He cracked his knuckles. "You killed your boy," the giant rumbled. I stood my ground. I didn't back down. I was terrified, yes. But I was Otis King. I had faced the Viet Cong. I had faced the cartel. I wasn't going to die on my knees in a dirty cell. "I didn't kill him," I said, my voice calm and low. But the man who did just walked out that door. The giant didn't listen. He stepped closer, casting a shadow that swallowed me whole. The other prisoners formed a circle. The guards outside turned their backs. The order had been given. It was supposed to be an execution. But Brad had made one mistake. He assumed that because these men were criminals, they had no code. And he assumed that because I was old, I was defenseless. I took a deep breath, centered my weight on my good leg, and prepared for the fight of my life. The night was far from over. The giant of a man stood over me, his fists clenched like sledgehammers. His shadow swallowed me whole, and for a heartbeat I thought this was how it ended. Not with a trial, not with justice, but beaten to death on the cold concrete floor of a county jail because a rich man paid for the privilege. 2 other inmates flanked him, their eyes hard and devoid of mercy. They were waiting for the signal to stomp the life out of me. "You killed your own blood," the giant rumbled, his voice vibrating in his chest. "That is a sin you don't walk away from, old man." I looked up at him. I didn't see a monster. I saw a jawline I hadn't seen in 30 years. I saw a scar above the left eyebrow that mirrored one I remembered on a man who once carried me 2 miles through a rice paddy with a piece of shrapnel in his leg. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I just spoke, my voice calm and steady amidst the stench of sweat and fear. "You have your father's eyes, Tyrell, and you have his temper too." The giant froze. His fist hovered in the air, trembling slightly. The silence that fell over the cell was absolute. The other 2 inmates looked at him confused, waiting for him to strike. "What did you call me?" The giant whispered, the menace replaced by sudden confusion. Nobody in here knew his real name. To them he was just Bone Crusher. I stood up slowly, my hip popping painfully, but I kept my eyes locked on his. "I called you Tyrell Booker. Your daddy was Sergeant Thomas Booker. We called him Tank. We served in the 1st Engineer Battalion. He was the best structural specialist I ever commanded." The giant took a step back, his face losing its hardness. He looked like a little boy who had just been caught stealing cookies. My daddy kept a picture of his lieutenant on the mantle. Said that man saved his life in '68. I nodded slowly. I reached into my shirt, pulling out the dog tags I still wore next to my skin. I held them out. "I am that lieutenant's son. And your daddy saved me just as many times." Tyrell stared at the tags. Then he looked at me. The rage evaporated, replaced by a reverence that I hadn't seen since I left the service. He didn't hit me. He wrapped his massive arms around me in a bear hug that cracked my back. "Pop," he choked out. "My God, Pop. They told us you were a monster. They said you killed your boy for insurance money." "They lied, Tyrell," I said, patting his massive back. The man who put me in here is the one who killed my son, and he paid you to finish the job." Tyrell pulled back, his face darkening with a new kind of fury. But this time it wasn't directed at me. He turned to the other inmates who were still standing there stunned. You hear that Tyrell roared, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "Nobody touches him. This man is family. Anyone looks at him wrong." They answer to me. Just like that. The power dynamic in the cell shifted. Brad thought he had thrown me into a pit of vipers. He didn't realize he had just dropped the general back among his troops. I wasn't an inmate anymore. I was the OG, the original gangster, the veteran. I sat back down on the bench, but this time Tyrell sat next to me, acting as my personal bodyguard. "I need a favor, son," I said quietly. "I need a phone. In prison, a smartphone is worth more than gold." But for Tyrell, it was a small price to pay for the man who saved his father. He reached into his sock and pulled out a small, battered smartphone. "It is risky, Pop," he warned. "They monitor the traffic." "Not where I am calling," I said. I dialed Tanya's number. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the anticipation of the strike. She picked up on the first ring. "Otis, are you okay?" "The news says you are in custody. I am fine, Tanya. I am safe, but we are done playing defense." I took a deep breath. I looked around the cell. These men, castaways of society, were listening. They knew what it felt like to be crushed by the system. "Tanya," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Initiate Project Zero." There was a pause on the other line, a hesitation. "Project Zero, Otis, that is the nuclear option. If we dump that data, there is no going back. It will burn King Sentinel to the ground. It will destroy the stock price. It will ruin everything Marcus built." "No," I corrected. "It will destroy what Brad stole. Marcus built a legacy of truth. We are just cleaning the house. Do it." I heard the rapid clicking of keys, then Tanya's voice trembling with excitement, uploading to the FBI secure server, mirroring to WikiLeaks. Sending to the New York Times, CNN, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. 5 seconds. I held the phone away from my ear. 3, 2, 1. "Done," Tanya whispered. "The world knows." I handed the phone back to Tyrell. "Keep it, son. Watch the show." It started slowly. A murmur from the guard station down the hall, a telephone ringing, then another, then a cacophony of ringing phones. Inside the cell, the small television mounted in the corner was playing a rerun of a sitcom. Suddenly, the screen cut to black. The breaking news banner flashed across the bottom in urgent red. "We interrupt this program for a major developing story," the news anchor said, looking visibly flustered, holding a piece of paper that had just been handed to her. "A massive data leak from the security firm King Sentinel has just been released online. The documents appear to show a systemic money laundering operation involving the Sinaloa cartel and high-ranking company executives." The cell went dead silent. Every eye was glued to the screen. The documents, the anchor continued, specifically named Chief Financial Officer Brad Sterling as the architect of the scheme. "We are also receiving reports of a video confession regarding the death of the company's founder, Marcus King." Tyrell looked at me, his mouth open. "You did that, Pop? From inside here?" I leaned back against the cold wall and closed my eyes. I didn't smile. This wasn't funny. This was justice. Brad thought he could buy the police. He thought he could buy the narrative. But he forgot that information travels faster than money. He forgot that in the digital age, the truth is like water. It always finds a way out. Outside the cell, chaos erupted. I could hear Captain Vance shouting orders. I heard the heavy boots of federal agents hitting the floor. The local police had been bought, but the FBI, the DEA, Brad couldn't buy them all. Not with the whole world watching. The door to the cell block crashed open. But it wasn't the guards coming to beat me. It was a team of men in windbreakers with those 3 magic letters in yellow on their backs. "FBI Otis King," an agent shouted. I stood up slowly. Tyrell stood up with me, ready to defend me. "It is okay, son," I said, patting his arm. "My ride is here." I walked to the bars. The agent looked at me. He didn't see a criminal. He saw the whistleblower. "Mr. King," the agent said, unlocking the gate. "We received your package. We have some questions. And we believe you have been wrongfully detained." I stepped out of the cell. I looked back at Tyrell. "Thank you, soldier," I said. Tyrell saluted. A sloppy prison yard salute, but it meant more to me than any medal I had ever received. I walked out of the precinct not in handcuffs but flanked by federal agents. I passed Captain Vance's office. He was in handcuffs being read his rights by another team of agents. He looked at me with terror in his eyes. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat. I just kept walking. I had launched the missile. Now I was going to watch it land. Brad was at the airport. He was trying to run, but he was about to find out that you can't outrun a ghost who controls the machine. The air outside the precinct tasted like rain and gasoline, but to me, it tasted like victory. I walked out the heavy double doors not as a prisoner, but as a prophet vindicated by his own prophecy. The steps were crowded with reporters, a chaotic sea of microphones and cameras flashing in the gray morning light. They shouted my name, asking if I knew about the cartel, asking if I was a hero. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I just looked through them, my eyes fixed on the black government SUV waiting at the curb. The FBI agent who had escorted me out opened the door. His name was Agent Miller, and he looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "You caused quite a storm, Mr. King," he said as we pulled away from the mob. "The market opened 10 minutes ago. King Sentinel stock has already dropped 80%. Trading has been halted by the SEC. It is a bloodbath." I leaned back in the leather seat, closing my eyes for a second. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was a cleansing. Project Zero had done exactly what Marcus designed it to do. It didn't just leak documents, it dismantled the company's infrastructure. Every illicit transfer, every bribed official, every laundered dollar was now public record. The fortress Brad Sterling had built on my son's grave was crumbling into dust. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice rough. "We have agents raiding the headquarters now," Miller said, gripping the steering wheel. "We have seized the servers. We have the building surrounded." But Sterling isn't there. I knew he wouldn't be. Brad wasn't a captain who went down with the ship. He was a rat who swam for the nearest life raft. "He is heading for the airfield," I said. "He keeps a Gulf Stream at DeKalb Peachtree. If he gets in the air, he will be in a non-extradition country by dinner time." "We have units headed there," Miller said. "But he has a head start, and he is desperate." "Turn on the radio," I said. Miller flipped the switch. The police scanner was crackling with frantic energy. Voices overlapped, shouting coordinates and updates. Then a voice cut through the static clear and panicked. "Suspect vehicle located. Black armored SUV northbound on Claremont. High rate of speed. We are in pursuit." "That is him," Miller said, hitting the sirens. I watched the city blur past the window. Atlanta was waking up to a scandal that would shake its foundations, but all I could think about was the man driving that SUV. I closed my eyes, and I could almost see inside that car. I could picture the panic, the sweat beating on Brad's forehead, the way his hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. And I knew he wasn't alone. Through the scanner updates, we pieced together the scene unfolding miles ahead of us. Brad was driving like a madman, weaving through traffic, running red lights. Jessica was in the passenger seat. I could imagine her screaming, clutching her designer bag, the realization finally sinking in that the fairy tale was actually a horror story. They thought they were partners. They thought they were the new royalty of Atlanta. But when the walls fall down, you find out who people really are. The radio crackled again. "Suspect vehicle has stopped. Repeat, suspect vehicle has stopped on the access road to the airport. There is an altercation inside the vehicle." Altercation. That was a polite police word for a betrayal. I leaned forward, gripping the dashboard. "What is happening?" "Subject male is pushing subject female out of the car," the officer on the radio shouted. "He is... My God, he just kicked her out onto the pavement." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Brad had done the math. The helicopter had a weight limit. Or maybe he just realized that Jessica was a liability. She was the face of the grieving widow, the one who had spoken to the press. If she was caught, she would draw the heat. She would slow them down. He threw her away like a used wrapper. Miller swerved through traffic, pushing the SUV to its limit. "We are 2 minutes out." When we rounded the corner to the access road, I saw her. Jessica was sitting on the wet asphalt, her expensive trench coat torn, her knees scraped and bleeding. She was watching the taillights of the SUV disappear toward the hangars. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was just sitting there in the rain, staring at nothing. As we sped past, I locked eyes with her for a split second. She saw me. She saw the man she had tried to institutionalize, the man she had tried to bury. In her eyes, I didn't see anger. I saw total devastation. She had sold her soul for a fortune, and the devil had just left her with the bill. "Stop for her," Miller asked, slowing down. No, I said, my voice hard. The local police have her. She is not the target. Drive. We punched through the chain-link gate onto the tarmac. The airfield was a vast expanse of gray concrete under a gray sky. In the distance, I saw it, the sleek silver shape of the private jet. Its engines were already whining a high-pitched scream that hurt the ears. The stairs were down. The black SUV screeched to a halt right next to the plane. Brad jumped out. He was carrying 2 large duffel bags. Cash or gold. The only things that matter when the law is chasing you. He didn't look back. He didn't look for Jessica. He ran toward the stairs, his tie flapping in the wind. "He is going to make it," Miller shouted, grabbing his radio. "Tower ground all flights. Repeat, ground all flights." But it was too late for the tower. The jet was already taxiing, moving away from the hangar, preparing for a short runway takeoff. Brad was halfway up the stairs. "Drive onto the runway I commanded." "We can't," Miller said. "That is a violation of federal—" I reached over and grabbed the wheel, jerking it to the right. "My son died for this country," I shouted. "Drive the damn car," Miller cursed, but he floored it. We raced across the tarmac, the tires singing on the wet concrete. The jet was turning, aligning itself with the runway. Brad was at the door of the plane looking back. He saw us. He saw the flashing lights. And he smiled. I could see it even from this distance. That smug, arrogant smile. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. He waved. A mocking little wave goodbye. He stepped inside the plane, and the door began to close. "He is gone," Miller said, slamming his hand on the dashboard. "We can't stop a jet with a car." I looked at the plane. I looked at the engine spooling up, gathering the power to lift that murderer into the safety of the clouds. And then I remembered. I remembered the phone in my pocket. The phone Tyrell had given me. The phone connected to Tanya. "He is not gone," I whispered. I pulled out the phone. I didn't dial Tanya. I opened the app she had installed just before I initiated Project Zero, the app that controlled the Nemesis protocol. Marcus hadn't just built a financial AI, he had built a security override for every asset owned by King Sentinel, the house, the cars, and the jet. I tapped the screen. The icon was a small red shield. "Override pilot control," I said out loud, my thumb hovering over the button. Miller looked at me crazy. "What are you doing?" "I am grounding him," I said. I pressed the button. On the runway, the jet's engines roared to full power. The plane began to lurch forward. But then suddenly, the pitch changed. The roar turned into a whine and then a sputtering cough. The flaps on the wings slammed down violently. The landing gear, which had just begun to retract, locked back into place with a mechanical groan. The plane didn't accelerate. It stopped dead in the middle of the runway. I watched as the door popped back open. Brad stumbled out, looking confused, shouting at the pilots. He was checking his phone frantically. I told Miller to stop the car. We were 50 yards away. I opened the door and stepped out onto the tarmac. The wind whipped my coat around my legs. My hip burned, but I stood tall. Brad saw me. He froze. He dropped the bags of money. He looked at the plane, then he looked at me. He realized then that his pilot wasn't flying that plane. I was. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a badge. I just stood there, an old man with a cane blocking the path of a billionaire. "You have nowhere left to go, Brad," I shouted, my voice carried by the wind. "The sky is closed." Brad looked around. The FBI vans were breaching the perimeter fence. The sirens were closing in from all sides. He was trapped on a strip of concrete with the man he failed to kill. He reached into his jacket. "Gun," Miller shouted, drawing his weapon and using the car door as a shield. "Drop it." Brad pulled out a silver pistol, but he didn't aim it at us. He didn't aim it at the police. He looked at the money on the ground. He looked at the plane that wouldn't fly. And then he looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. "You ruin everything," he screamed. He raised the gun toward me. I didn't flinch. I didn't dive. I just watched him. Shoot me, I thought. Go ahead. Make me a martyr. It won't unlock the accounts. It won't start the plane. But before he could pull the trigger, a single shot rang out. It wasn't Brad. Brad's shoulder exploded in a mist of red. He spun around, dropping the gun, screaming in agony. I looked back. Agent Miller was standing there, smoke curling from the barrel of his service weapon. "Target down," Miller said calmly into his radio. "Suspect is wounded and secured." I walked forward. I walked past the agents rushing in with handcuffs. I walked past the money blowing across the runway. I walked right up to where Brad was lying on the concrete, clutching his shattered shoulder. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixed with rain and blood. "It is over," I said, standing over him. He spat at my shoe. "Go to hell, old man." I looked down at him and I felt nothing. No joy, no anger, just a profound sense of fatigue. "I am already there, Brad," I said softly. "I just came back to make sure I dragged you down with me." I turned around and walked away as they cuffed him. I didn't look back at the jet. I didn't look back at the money. I looked toward the horizon where the sun was just trying to break through the storm clouds. My son was dead. My house was a crime scene. My life was in ruins. But for the first time in 3 days, the silence in my head wasn't screaming. It was peace. The collapse was complete. Now it was time to see what could be built from the ashes. The helicopter blades began to slice through the heavy Atlanta air, a deafening rhythm that vibrated in my chest. I stood on the wet tarmac, the wind whipping my coat around my legs, watching as the sleek black machine lifted a few inches off the ground. Brad was in the window. I saw him clearly. He wasn't looking at the police cars surrounding the airfield. He was looking at me, and he was smiling. It was that same smile I had seen at the funeral, the smile of a man who believes he is above the laws of gravity and men. He raised his hand and gave me a mock salute, a final gesture of disrespect from a man flying away with my son's fortune. He thought the chase was over. He thought he had won. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone Tyrell had given me. The screen was wet with rain, but the red icon of the Nemesis protocol burned bright. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, precise clarity of a combat engineer about to detonate a bridge. I tapped the icon. Inside the cockpit, the world changed in a heartbeat. I couldn't hear it, but I saw it. Brad's smile vanished. He grabbed the controls, jerking the stick, but the machine didn't respond. The helicopter hovered there, suspended like a dragonfly caught in amber. Through the high-frequency radio channel I had hijacked, I could hear what was happening inside that glass bubble. "System override," the voice of the onboard computer announced. But it wasn't the standard robotic female voice. It was Marcus. My son's voice, synthesized by the AI he had built, filled the headset Brad was wearing. "Identity unverified," the voice said, calm and terrifying. "Thief detected." I watched Brad frantically tapping the instrument panel. He was shouting at the pilot, but the pilot had taken his hands off the controls, staring at the screens in horror. The dashboard had turned a deep flashing crimson. "Protocol Icarus initiated," the voice continued. "Access denied. Self-destruct sequence armed." Brad's face pressed against the glass. It was a mask of pure primal terror. He was screaming, clawing at the door handle. He thought the machine was about to explode. He thought he was going to burn. 10, 9, 8. I watched him panic. It was a beautiful, terrible thing to witness. The man who had poisoned my son, who had thrown his wife out of a moving car, was now trapped in a cage of his own making, counting down the seconds to his death. 7, 6, 5. He hammered on the reinforced glass with his fists. He looked at me, begging, mouthing the word, "Please." 4, 3, 2. He curled into a ball, covering his head, waiting for the fire. 1. The engine cut. There was no explosion, no fireball. Just the sudden whining silence of the turbine spinning down. The helicopter dropped the few inches back onto the tarmac with a heavy thud. The doors clicked, engaging the electromagnetic locks. It wasn't a bomb. It was a prison. The lights inside the cockpit turned from red to a cold, clinical white. Brad uncurled himself, looking around, patting his chest, realizing he was alive. But he wasn't free. The doors wouldn't open. The glass was bulletproof. He was sealed inside a fishbowl on display for the FBI agents who were now swarming the aircraft with their weapons drawn. I walked forward. I moved slowly, leaning on my cane, savoring every step. The rain washed the blood from my face. I walked right up to the helicopter. Brad was staring at me through the glass. He was hyperventilating, his expensive suit soaked in sweat. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I pulled the radio handset from my pocket and pressed the talk button. My voice was the only thing he could hear in that silent, sealed cockpit. "You missed your flight, Brad." He glared at me, his eyes full of hate, banging his fist weakly against the window. I leaned in closer until my breath fogged the glass that separated us. "You told me at the funeral that you would spend his millions better than he did." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the realization dawn on him that his life as he knew it was over. "Well, I have good news," I said. "Now you will get to spend something else. You will spend the rest of your life in a cage, and the best part is, it is absolutely free." I dropped the radio on the wet concrete. I turned my back on him. I didn't look back as the agents surrounded the helicopter. I didn't need to see him being dragged out in handcuffs. I had seen enough. The ghost had finished his work. It was time to go home. The courtroom was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday, but there was no prayer here today, only the cold, hard machinery of justice grinding forward. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's table. I wore my best suit, the one Marcus had bought me for his inauguration as CEO. It was pressed clean and sharp, a stark contrast to the orange jumpsuits worn by the two people sitting at the defense tables. Brad Sterling and Jessica King were seated 20 feet apart. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at the jury. And they certainly didn't look at me. The arrogant billionaire and the grieving widow were gone. In their place sat two desperate drowning rats willing to claw each other's eyes out to stay afloat for just one more minute. The trial had moved fast. With the evidence from Project Zero and the confession from the graveyard, the state didn't need to work hard. But what the world wanted to see was the betrayal, and Brad and Jessica delivered a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Your Honor," Brad's lawyer shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Jessica. "Mr. Sterling is a victim of manipulation. He was seduced. He was fed lies about abuse. He believed he was rescuing a woman in danger. He had no knowledge of the poison. That was all her doing." "Liar," Jessica screamed, jumping to her feet before her lawyer could restrain her. Her hair was messy, her face devoid of makeup. "You planned it all, Brad. You brought the thallium from the lab. You told me how many drops to use. You said if I didn't do it, you would kill me too." "Order," the judge banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Sit down, defendant, or you will be held in contempt." I watched them tear each other apart. It was pathetic. They were arguing over who struck the match, but they both poured the gasoline. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The motive. The child. Brad's defense hinged on one thing: passion. He claimed it was a crime of passion committed to protect his unborn child. He tried to paint himself as a tragic father fighting for his bloodline. "She told me it was my baby," Brad sobbed to the jury, trying to squeeze out a tear. "She told me Marcus was sterile. I did what any father would do. I protected my family." The jury looked sympathetic. Even I felt a flicker of disgust at how well he played the part. A father protecting his child is a powerful narrative. That was when the prosecutor stood up. He nodded at me. It was time to play the final card. The card I had found in the decrypted medical files the night I hid in the drainage pipe. The prosecution calls Otis King to the stand. I walked to the stand. My cane tapped a steady rhythm on the floor. I swore on the Bible. I looked at Brad. He finally met my eyes. He looked defiant. He thought he still had a chance. "Mr. King," the prosecutor said, "you uncovered the medical records of the defendant, Jessica King. Can you tell the court what you found regarding the pregnancy that Mr. Sterling claims was his motivation?" I leaned into the microphone. My voice was raspy, but it filled the room. "I found a fabrication," I said. "A lie so deep it cost my son his life." I pulled a document from my pocket. It wasn't a digital file. It was a certified letter from the fertility clinic Jessica claimed to have visited. "Jessica King is not pregnant," I said clearly. "She never was." The courtroom gasped. Brad froze, his mouth hanging open. "Objection," Jessica's lawyer shouted. "Relevance. It is entirely relevant," the judge ruled. "Continue, Mr. King." I looked directly at Brad. "She played you, Brad, just like she played Marcus. The ultrasounds were downloaded from the internet. The morning sickness was an act. And that invasive DNA test she claimed to have done, the one that proved the baby was yours." I held up the paper. "She faked the lab results. I had the clinic run a real test on the samples she provided for her last checkup. There is no HCG in her blood. There is no heartbeat. There is no air. She invented a child to trap two rich men because she knew that was the only way to secure the money." Brad turned slowly to look at Jessica. His face went from confusion to a horror so profound it looked like his soul was leaving his body. "You lied," he whispered. The microphone at his table picked it up. Jessica didn't deny it. She just stared at the table, her shoulders shaking. "I killed him for nothing," Brad screamed. He lunged across the aisle. "I killed my best friend for a ghost." The bailiffs tackled him before he could reach her. Brad was screaming, crying, howling like a wounded animal. It wasn't the sound of guilt. It was the sound of a man realizing he was the fool of the century. He hadn't destroyed Marcus for a legacy. He had destroyed him for a phantom. The judge hammered the gavel demanding order, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the truth. There was no crime of passion. There was just greed, pure and simple. The verdict came back in under an hour. Guilty, on all counts. First-degree murder, conspiracy, embezzlement. The judge didn't waste time with speeches. "Brad Sterling and Jessica King, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You took a brilliant life and you tried to destroy a father. May you find the time to reflect on your sins." As the guards dragged them away, Brad didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, a broken man. Jessica was sobbing, begging for mercy, but no one was listening. I stood up. The courtroom began to empty. The reporters were shouting questions, but I didn't answer. I walked to the back of the room where Elias Holloway was waiting with a briefcase. He opened it. Inside were the transfer documents for King Sentinel. "It is done," Otis Holloway said. "The board has reinstated you as interim chairman. The trust is unlocked. The company is yours." I looked at the papers. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name. "It is not mine, Elias," I said, closing the briefcase. "It is Marcus's. I am just the caretaker." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The rain had finally stopped. The air was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath. My hips still hurt. My heart still ached for the son I would never see again. But the weight was gone. The lies were buried. I hailed a taxi. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Oak Hill Cemetery," I said. I had a long conversation to finish with my son. I had to tell him that the bad guys lost. I had to tell him that his dad didn't let him down. And then I had a company to rebuild, not for the money, but to make sure the name King stood for something good again. The trial was over. The work was just beginning. The marble headstone was cold to the touch, cold enough to numb my fingertips, but I didn't pull my hand away. It was the only connection I had left. The engraving was fresh, sharp, and clean against the gray stone. Marcus King, beloved son, visionary. The dirt over his grave had been packed down smooth, replacing the chaotic mud from that terrible night when Brad tried to dig him up. The flowers were fresh white lilies that smelled of peace and finality. I stood there for a long time listening to the wind rustle through the old oak trees. I had won. The headlines screamed it. The stock market confirmed it. The prison cells held the proof of it. But standing here in the quiet of the late afternoon, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a father who had survived the war but lost the only thing worth fighting for. Justice is a strange comfort. It satisfies the mind, but it leaves the heart freezing cold. I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, respectful steps on the grass. I didn't turn around. I knew the rhythm. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Otis," Elias Holloway said softly, stopping a few feet away. "The press is still looking for you. They want a statement." "Let them look," I said, keeping my eyes on the stone. "I have nothing to say to them. Everything I had to say was said in that courtroom." Holloway stepped closer. He wasn't holding legal briefs this time. He was holding a sleek black tablet. "He left you one last thing, Otis." I frowned, looking at the device. "I thought we found everything. The drive, the confession, the medical records." "This wasn't in the safe," Holloway said. "This was sent to me automatically by the Nemesis protocol 24 hours after the verdict was read. Marcus programmed it to release only when the battle was truly over. He wanted you to hear this when you could finally breathe again." I took the tablet. My hands trembled slightly. I sat down on the stone bench facing the grave and pressed play. The screen flickered, and there he was. Marcus. He was sitting in his office, the storm painting behind him. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, the shadow of the poison already working on his system. But his eyes were bright. They were sharp and full of that fierce intelligence that had built an empire. "Hey, Dad." The sound of his voice hit me harder than a physical blow. It was so clear, so alive. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it means you did exactly what I knew you would do. You fought, you stood tall, you took down the people who thought they could walk over us." He paused on the screen, looking down at his hands, then back up at the camera. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry I left this mess for you to clean up. I wanted to protect you from it. I thought I could handle Brad and Jessica on my own. I was arrogant, and it cost me my life. He leaned forward, the camera focusing on his face. But I need you to know something. I didn't build King Sentinel for the money. I didn't build it for the jets or the mansions. I built it to prove that a kid from our neighborhood could change the world. Brad turned it into a weapon. You have to turn it back into a shield. He took a deep breath. The money, Dad. The billions in the trust. Don't let it sit in a bank. Don't let it rot. Use it. Rebuild the neighborhood. Fix the schools where you taught me to read. Build the clinics we never had. Give the next generation a chance to be better than we were. That is the legacy I want. Not a name on a building, but a future for people who look like us. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I love you, Pop. You were always my hero. The world called me a genius, but I was just a soldier following his captain. Dismissed Dad. Go live. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the graveyard wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. A single tear escaped, rolling down the deep lines of my cheek. Then another. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. They were the final payment, the last tax on a debt of grief that was finally paid in full. He was right. The war was over. The rebuilding had to begin. I stood up. My hip popped a familiar ache, but it felt different now. It wasn't a burden. It was a reminder that I was still standing. I was 75 years old. I was alone. But I had a mission. I looked at Holloway. Call the board. I said, my voice steady and strong. Tell them we are liquidating the offshore accounts. Tell them we are starting a scholarship fund. And tell them to get the construction crews ready. We have work to do. Holloway smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Yes, sir. I looked down at the grave one last time. Rest easy, son, I whispered. I have the watch. I turned my back on the tombstone. I walked toward the gate, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. My shadow stretched out long in front of me, not behind me. It looked like a bridge leading to tomorrow. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. Legacy isn't about the millions you leave in a bank account, nor the monuments built in your name. It is about the character you instill in those who survive you. Marcus couldn't save his own life, but he saved his dignity by trusting the one person who loved him without condition, his father. In a world obsessed with net worth, Otis King proved that integrity is the only currency that never devaluates. Evil may manipulate the truth for a moment, but it can never withstand the patience of a righteous man armed with a father's love.